Hey everyone, this is Dr. Emily Sherding with American Resiliency. We're here with another international outlook. This is our first time going to Africa. This video is about Uganda's climate outlook because I think Uganda is awesome. Before we talk about that, though, I want to talk a little about Uganda's work on climate resilience. This is a moment for respect. If you are at all interested in ag science and climate, either you're interested in millet or you ought to be interested in millet. The way we tend to hear about it here in America is mostly through Cornell's publicity. It's cool that Cornell supports this effort, but work on climate resistant millet is not something that's happening primarily through outside support. That work is pouring forth like a love letter to the future right out of Uganda. This is work happening in Uganda with Ugandan investment and Ugandan leaders. It's a top-line research priority at Makerere University in Uganda, which you gotta check out the about page for this university. These people are really cool. Established just in 1922 as a technical school, taking in 14 students who are working on carpentry, building, and mechanics. Now they're a worldwide research powerhouse. NARO is another big-time player, the National Agricultural Research Organization in Uganda. Here we're looking a little bit at some of their specific work on pearl millet. You can see this plant. You may not be able to recognize it yet, but I think you're gonna know it. Naro and Makerere University, they have a relationship, but they're independent. There are many Ugandan organizations focusing on climate resilient crops. It's a significant national effort. And let me make an important connection for you. If you're in a part of America where we're projecting a significant increase in days over 100, even in days over 105, you should know our current staple crops are going to take big hits under those conditions. If you're concerned about food production over 105, millet is important. Millet currently bears up to 42C, that's 107.6F. Those are temps we are projected to see regularly in large parts of Kansas and Oklahoma as we approach 2C. Those are important grain producing regions in the US that could get knocked out or they could pick up thanks to our friends in Uganda. These Ugandan organizations we just learned about are only examples of places where scientists are working really hard to develop the crops the world needs using the incredible genetic diversity that is preserved in Africa. And to help you understand that, let's talk a little more about Uganda. The country's mostly tropical with a more arid region in the north. They grow coffee there. Check this out. You can see here in this figure from the World Bank climate projections for Uganda, in that this figure, of course, is definitely not primarily projected to outside interests, that in Uganda, we do anticipate that some coffee producing regions will hold up even as we move into our climate future. Thanks, World Bank. I'm sure we're all relieved to know that coffee is going to be okay. But let's talk about some other life forms. The genetic and biodiversity in Uganda is off the charts. Uganda is a small country. It's about the size of the state of Oregon in the US, so that Americans can get a little one-to-one on there. They have over 18,000 known species, including all your coolest mammals. And not just large charismatic herbivores, they've got charismatic large carnivores. In Uganda, you've got lion, leopard, and hyena all under active protection. Protecting carnivores means protecting habitats and ecosystems. Protecting biodiversity is a very serious national focus for Uganda. They were one of the first countries to mainstream World Bank facing sustainable development goals as part of its economic development plan. They're very hardcore about preservation, conservation, and sustainability. I want to point out this is not happening because Uganda is such a wealthy country that they have the luxury of investing in climate, which I think is how we often see it here in the US, where it's like, if I get a promotion, I could buy the fair trade coffee from Kenya. Then people will know that I am virtuous. Climate is a top priority in Uganda. Well, malnutrition is a big problem, especially among children. As of 2012, about a third of their children under 5 have stunted growth from malnutrition. And this is how hard they're investing in the global climate future. In Uganda, 67% of households have access to a usable road all year round. When people get to that road, they're probably going to walk. There are 9.3 vehicles per 1,000 Ugandans. As of 2002, Americans had 900 vehicles per 1,000 Americans. Share that with you, that information, because I think many people have an image of Africa as being monolithic and poor and needing to be educated, which frankly is a dumb way to think. Uganda is just one example of an African nation that, in a context of working to meet the basic needs of their people, is also investing and working towards the best future we can hope for. All right. I think I brought you in close enough that in case, like for me, as of 2 weeks ago, your background knowledge about Uganda was very limited. Now you're up to speed. I think we're at a place where we can talk about what the World Bank is seeing as to how climate change will impact Uganda. This is the source material that I'm using. It's from the World Bank Climate Portal. Reports are available for every country. They're very hard to read. I'm going to be going through them and giving some summary information over time. Next up, I've promised that we're going to look if there are any meaningful updates for our friends specifically in the UK, in the EU. After that, we're going to be moving on to Brazil, another country where we're looking at worldwide impacts with their climate future. As we get into the contents of that report, I want to let you know everything I'm going to describe now makes me sad and mad. First off, Uganda is going to lose their ice. In a quote from the report, we learned the Rwenzori mountain range has permanent ice caps. However, due to rising temperatures, the area typically covered by ice reduced by 49% between 1987 to 2003 and is projected to disappear by the 2040s. This has implications for the area's water resources, livelihood activities, and is likely to change its epidemiological profile. So that means that in large parts of Uganda, you're going through the same major landscape shift that we expect to see on parts of the West Coast, where you're moving from a snowpack melt-driven water cycle to a rain-fed water cycle without that consistency that you get through summertime snowpack melt. Big implications. In the case of this country, we're looking at epidemiological impacts at those changes to the water cycle, majorly increasing disease risks. I'll talk more about that in a moment. I think it's important to know that Uganda is experiencing immediate changes in major rainfall patterns, changes that are happening today. In figure 7 here, you can see that Uganda is already in the squiggly zone. And I feel like this figure says a lot because we can see these averages for the different scenarios for reducing emissions in this figure. But look at how huge the range is outside of those averages. And that range is really the problem that Uganda is facing, where they have this tremendously amplified drought and flood scenario, drought or deluge, nothing in between. And the annual projected variances are big in any of the scenarios, in any of the RCP scenarios. When I look at a figure like figure 7, it doesn't surprise me that not only are floods already a big problem in Uganda, but Uganda is also seeing declines in rainfall, especially in the north, which is the part of the country further outside of the tropical band. It gets less rain anyway and experiences more poverty today. Thinking a little bit more about the water trends and learning a little bit more, let's talk for a minute about Lake Victoria, which is, of course, a big part of Uganda's identity, cultural heritage, and a lot of people fish. Fish is a big deal in Uganda. Lake Victoria is the largest body of water in the area, although you got the big Rift Valley lakes as well. I think that when we think culturally, what does Lake Victoria mean? What do changes to Lake Victoria mean? If we talk about back in the US, Lake Superior is this sort of powerful symbol of stability that we see with Lake Victoria in this part of Africa. The same sort of powerful, ringing cultural force. We are currently observing a serious downward trend for water in Lake Victoria, and for it to be shrinking would be like if we were seeing the shoreline of Lake Superior retreat year over year. That's the kind of emotional impact you should sense when we consider negative changes to Lake Victoria. We're talking about major changes to lifeways and major emotional impacts for all the people of the region who have depended on that lake for generations spanning millennia. Due to the potential for increased rain across Uganda, if it falls in a drought and deluge cycle, more people are going to experience water stress. Most people in Uganda drink surface water. There's not some sophisticated plumbing system in most of the country. The surface water is going to get increasingly contaminated by extreme storms. There aren't sewers in most places, so there's not sufficient waste containment. I want to show you again the extreme variability I'm talking about. I feel like if you're a little bit of a stats nerd, these box and whisker plots in figure 13, these are some long whiskers on these plots. These are really extreme projected conditions because the variance is extreme. The water variance is just ridiculous. And you can see that if we don't reduce emissions, if we're looking at 8.5, that whisker is about twice as long as if we make some cuts. But even in RCP 2.6, which isn't happening, we haven't done the work, is pretty bad. To respond to this level of water cycle variability, there's an identified need in Uganda to learn more about and monitor groundwater and to increase and improve water infrastructure. It's also important to note that Uganda's primary source of power is hydropower, which is also going to get messed up by these changes. The impacts are already happening, destabilizing power generation in an area where most people don't have electricity wired to the home. So we're projecting these big changes to water, both in terms of major water features, from snow-capped mountains to Lake Victoria, jewel of the region, and in terms of precipitation patterns. Although Uganda is projected to get more rain in total overall, I hope that you have some understanding now of how that can end up causing more water stress, which does sound a little paradoxical at first. Let's talk about temperature changes. This is a largely tropical country, so we expect it to be pretty hot there. But when we look at projected changes, the most important thing that's already being experienced and is expected to get worse is the nighttime temperature. Figures 16 and 17 are good for that. And you can see the change is already happening. And again, the variance is enormous. Even if we made the biggest cuts we could, this number of tropical nights increasing is pretty substantial. Looking at our sort of near-term climate future, as you look past to a little towards 2.5C, Uganda is expecting to get about 74 additional hot days versus 136 additional hot nights. Assume you already had any hot nights. That's like most of your nights that are going to be hot. That really sucks. Hot days are expected to occur on 15 to 43% of days by the 2050s, and nights that are considered hot, which is defined as over 26C, are expected to increase more quickly than the hot days. If you're interested in how these trends interact, the heat increase and the precipitation changes, Figure 4 here is a good but difficult figure showing that first we're going to see heat increases. These heat increases we're already seeing, and then we're going to see precipitation changes increase with a trend towards more precipitation. But that, remember, is in the context of extreme variance in precipitation. So overall, climate change is projected to increase temperatures and impact water availability across Uganda, with central and southern regions expected to experience flooding due to an increased intensity of rainfall, while the north, northeast, west, and southwest can expect worsening aridity and more frequent droughts. Temperature increases, as well as the increase in the frequency and intensity of extreme droughts and floods, are likely to reduce crop yields and cause livestock to be lost, both in terms of reduced births and increased deaths. That's going to have big implications for food security. I'm putting up figure 10 here so that we can see that districts like Biukwe, Gulu, and Mbali are particularly at risk due to high levels of cash crops grown in those districts, coupled with specific climate outlooks of increased temperature and variable rainfall. It's worth noting that all of this comes together to create a big overall risk for increasing vector and waterborne disease, including terrible illnesses like malaria, dengue fever, and cholera. So the people of Uganda are facing a challenging future, a future that's going to change beloved landscapes, impact livelihoods, and increase the pressure people feel to exploit the natural world. When we look at how much of Uganda is already held in reserves, under protection, in a nation where a third of the children under 5 are stunted by malnutrition, I wonder if you can feel how passionately the people of Uganda must love their land and their fellow beings in the land. They are a people willing to suffer deeply to see their children suffer, to preserve their fellow beings in the land. The evidence we see in this report and the actions and investment of Uganda in our climate future demonstrate an ethic that demands respect and deep admiration. When nations like the US are asked to give more aid to the world, I think it's important that we think about Uganda. We are not talking about ignorant, helpless people. We are talking about people and nations that deserve enormous regard. I'll be back with another international report soon. I hope to do about one a month. Our friends in the EU, I'm going to see if we have new information to give you a meaningful projection update. The next entirely new country I intend to research is one whose actions will have profound implications for us all, Brazil. Uganda, I hope you feel my regard, and I hope this video has helped show more people like me who live in nations of the world that have taken so much wealth from Africa. One example of a great African nation. A nation whose people have contributed minimally to the crisis that faces us all, whose people contribute enormously to our best possible future, and whose calls for adaptation aid to the developing world are better seen as aligned with the virtue of justice than the virtue of charity. Thanks, folks, for taking some time to learn with me, to grow our understanding about the world and the future we will all face. Let's get ready. Hey folks, thanks for watching. This video is dedicated to my friend Corrie, whose work on the AR leadership team consistently pushes us to center on the earth, and who is always reminding us to look to Africa when we want to look deep. Corrie, thank you for being with me on this learning journey. I'm always grateful for your advice and for your friendship. I also, of course, want to take a moment to say thank you to the AR community, to the donors, to the volunteers, to everyone spreading the word online, and especially to everyone doing the work on the ground. It's thanks to all of you that I can keep doing this work, and I'm so grateful for your support. I'm glad to be getting ready with you, and I look forward to talking with you all again soon.